Next up, we have Kenneth Goldsmith. He is one of the co-curators of this event here with 89 Plus. And he is an American poet. He is the founding editor of Ubu Web and teaches poetics and poetic practice at the University of Pennsylvania, and also a class called Wasting Time on the Internet, in how to waste time on the internet. And yeah, he's published a number of books and is also senior editor of Pen Sound. Yes, he, for example, published the book Day in 2003, I think is an important book where he noted down, he made notes of everything he did. No, the Day was when he transcribed an issue of the New York Times, every single word, every part of it that appeared in the newspaper that day. Welcome, Kenneth Goldsmith.
At Tony Owsler's retrospective at the Williams College Museum of Art, upstairs, buried deep within the galleries, the artist had set up a microphone into which anyone could step up and speak. What they said would be broadcast into the entrance atrium of the museum. There were no restrictions on what you could say, only a small note reminding the speaker to be sensitive of others and a gentle suggestion to refrain from swearing. When it was my turn, I said in my clearest and most radio-like voice, "May I have your attention? May I have your attention? The museum is now closing. Please make your way to the exit. Thank you for visiting." Although it was hours away from closing time, I repeated the announcement again and saw on the video monitor provided people streaming toward the exit. Again, I made my announcement. At once, a frantic elderly guard came up to me, grabbed my arm, and said, "You're not allowed to say that." When I told him there was nothing prohibiting me from saying it, he again told me that I wasn't allowed. "Why?" I asked. "Because it's not true," he replied. "You must stop saying that right now." Of course, I repeated my announcement again. This poor man was really struggling with what to do with me. He knew that while I wasn't breaking any real laws, by questioning the institution's authority, I was breaking an unwritten social contract. At the afternoon poetry workshop with Michelle Obama, she was wearing a gorgeous beaded and sequined skirt, a skin-tight mauve tank top, and shiny pea-green pumps when she got up on stage. The room was fraught with tension. After giving a very stiff, formal introduction, suddenly her entire body posture changed. She slumped her shoulders and puckered her lips. She tousled her hair and said in a slangy, sort of homegirl voice, "Come on, everybody. What are you so uptight about? Relax. This is poetry, after all." One day in the mail, I received a wonderful book of visual poems. They were the most intricate and detailed pieces I'd ever seen, dense weavings of words that all added up to striking images. And if that weren't enough, all the poems doubled as autobiography embedded with strange stories from the author's life. But perhaps the most incredible thing was that they were all made in an early version of Microsoft Word. I corresponded with the poet, a man named David Daniels, who was later lucky enough to meet him, by then a craggy old man with a long white beard, and hear his story. In the 1950s, he was an up-and-coming New York abstract expressionist painter. Bound for stardom one night at a party, he said the wrong thing to de Kooning. He wouldn't tell me the details, and was expelled from the group. Shattered, he dutifully obeyed and left New York, landing in Boston. Lost and miserable, he drifted aimlessly through the streets of Boston looking for direction. Unable to find one, he decided to cast his life to the wind by simply saying yes to anything anyone asked of him. It turns out at that moment he was walking through Cambridge when a young panhandler asked him, "Can you spare a dime?" David said yes and gave him the money. The panhandler looked at him again and said, "Can you spare a quarter?" To which David responded in kind. This was followed by a request for $1 and then 5, all of which David handed over, whereupon the fellow asked if he could spend the night at David's house. David acquiesced. Before long, David had a roommate. As word got out among the young panhandlers, dropouts, acid heads, and hippies, David's house became a commune and remained the largest in Cambridge throughout the 1960s. Whoever needed a place to crash asked David, who always, true to his promise, responded yes. The house became a hub of activity, much of it illegal. When a prostitute asked him if she could turn tricks there, David said yes. Later, one of the many prostitutes who became fond of David asked her to marry him. He said yes. He also said yes when she asked him whether she could have his children. Over the years, David found himself being in the position of being a counselor to these young people, many of whom were Harvard and MIT dropouts. He would hold group therapy sessions, giving sage advice. He became sort of a guru. And over the years, he simply forgot about his art. By the late 70s, the commune was breaking up. Drugs had taken their toll. At the dawn of the 80s, with the appearance of AIDS, there was further devastation. One day, David got a call from one of the earliest members of the commune who, at this time, was residing on the West Coast and was involved in computers. He suggested that David relocate to the Bay Area. It turns out that many of the communards, shaking off their 60s bohemianism, had migrated west and were evolving into Silicon Valley moguls. To express their gratitude to David for saying yes, they purchased him a modest house in Oakland and gave him a lifelong stipend. The only thing they required was that David restart his legendary group therapy sessions in the Bay Area, which he did. For nearly 20 years, he held these sessions in an East Bay warehouse for some of the most successful entrepreneurs in America. But the silver lining was that as a gift, they gave David a PC with Microsoft Word. While he had never touched a computer, he intuitively began experimenting with Word as a way to write visual poetry. It was in this way that, decades later, David reconnected with being an artist. Ultimately, he mastered the Word program, turning it into a way to create these exquisite visual poems. Over the years, they evolved into Baroque bodies of work that he worked on every day until his death, just after the turn of the millennium. Thank you.